Hello, ladies. This is Dr. Melissa Rich. Welcome to this episode of Taking Care of Your Temple podcast. This is episode 33, I think. 33 or 32. I think it's 33. I think I put the wrong number on. Anyway, the right number will be written on there. Sorry. But this is the Key to Healthy, Happy Relationships Part 2. We started this last time. I'm going to continue this some more. So if you want to get the first part, you will need to go back to the last one. Then after this one, there will be one more, and that will be it, because there is a lot of information about relationships. So the Taking Care of Your Temple podcast is designed to help women connect with God on a regular basis and to use his power, wisdom, grace, strength, love, all the things to help them improve their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being. There are 4 principles in this podcast that I talk about that will help us do that. One is to keep our focus on God. So much easier to say than to do, because we are highly distractible beings. We live in a world of things happening all the time. So when you get off track, and you will, just remember to pull yourself back on, pull yourself back on, pull yourself back on. I do that. I feel like I do that constantly throughout my day. Next is to acknowledge that we are not enough on our own. We are not smart enough, strong enough, pretty enough, secure enough, anything enough. We need God's help to get through these things. And all we have to do is ask him for his help, and he's happy to provide it. Thank goodness. Next is to remember it is about progress, not perfection. Y'all, don't try to require perfection from yourself or from other people around you, because boy, that is just such a really good way to set yourself up for frustration and disappointment. God does not expect us to be perfect. Thank you, Lord. I mean that fervently. So we shouldn't either. So just be aware of that. And the last thing to be aware of is that we need to work on changing our thoughts, because our thoughts are what get us into trouble. The messages that we give ourselves on a regular basis are hugely important. If they are positive and healthy, great, we're moving forward. If they are negative and toxic, we're probably going to get stuck. So just be aware of the messages that you're giving to yourself and start changing them if need be. The verse for this podcast is 1 Corinthians 3:16. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Yeah, he does. We are part of his temple. His Spirit is in us. So let me say a quick prayer to get us going. Lord, I just thank you so much for the people who are listening today. I ask your blessings on their lives. I ask that they will draw near to you, and that they will use your power to do better, to be healthier, to be happier, to figure out ways to please you more. Thank you for your love, Lord. Amen. So my goal this week is to do the podcast on a weekly basis, which again, I'm at 32 or 33. I should know that. Sorry. And so we're moving right along. I've done pretty well. Sometimes I will have a guest. Sometimes, like today, it will be just me. You lucky people. So what we are looking at in relationships is red flags for relationships. I talked about a few of them last time, and I also explained kind of what red flags in relationships are, how they work. So we're picking up with our list. This is number 5. This is the 5th red flag. And y'all, it's a big one. It's a huge one. Physical, emotional, or mental abuse. There are some things that you kind of think, well, maybe they're not that bad. This one is that bad. There are undeniable, unmistakable, huge red flags in any relationship. Physical abuse is one that's really easy to see. However, having said that, emotional abuse can be just as damaging in the long run, and it is harder to see. Emotional abuse, involves controlling someone by using emotions to criticize, guilt, embarrass, shame, or just any way to manipulate them. This can be done through abusive words and through bullying behavior. Again, that one is easy to recognize. The goal of emotional abuse is to control the other person by isolating, by silencing, or discrediting them. And it's one of the hardest forms of abuse to recognize. It really is. It's kind of very sneaky. So some examples of emotional abuse to help you recognize them if you see them in the future are criticizing you for not completing tasks according to their standards, especially if those standards are pretty arbitrary. Expecting you to share their opinion pretty much in everything. In other words, you're not allowed to have a different opinion than the other person does. Demanding, I love this one, that you name exact dates and times when the things that you were discussing that upset you happened. And when you can't do this, they dismiss it and say, well, then obviously that never happened. I mean, who knows the exact dates and times when we say things, but they expect you to. Another example of emotional abuse is if they refuse to accept your feelings because they try to define how you should feel. Anytime someone tries to tell you how you should feel, this is really not a good thing. Also, requiring you to explain how you feel over and over. And this, by the way, is not because they don't understand what you're saying, it's because they don't like what you're saying, and they're hoping you'll change. And then another example of emotional abuse is accusing you of being too sensitive, too emotional, or crazy. This happens a lot more than you would think. And so you start feeling, maybe I am being too sensitive, maybe I am crazy. So another sign of another type of red flag is when they have lots of stories about their crazy exes. Now, a few stories here and there are going to be okay. Talking about old flames is common, especially when you're first starting in the relationship. And again, obviously, this is a romantic relationship. So you really need to pay attention to the language that the other person uses when they discuss people they've been with in the past. If they describe their exes as crazy a lot, instead of taking about 50% of the responsibility for the craziness themselves, then probably that relationship was out of kilter. And if you persist in being in a relationship with that person, you have a very good chance of becoming the next crazy ex. So just be aware, it's a red flag. One that really drives me crazy is being cruel or mean to people who are, quote, beneath them, unquote. How does this person treat waiters, salespeople, or anyone else they view as subordinates? If they are routinely rude, arrogant, dismissive, and thoughtless, it usually indicates that they view themselves as being above everybody else and entitled to behave however they want. And if you stay in the relationship, you could be the one getting that behavior at some point in the future. So just be aware. Another red flag is narcissism. We've all heard of this. Narcissistic personality disorder is a condition, mental and emotional, that indicates this self-obsession that some people have and a misplaced sense of importance. It can come across as delusions of grandeur, although not always. These people really are not necessarily experiencing a break from reality, although it may feel that way to the people around them. They just believe that the world revolves around them. And if anyone threatens that belief, then there's going to be turmoil and drama and chaos that are going to happen. Being emotionally involved with a narcissist, an ego-driven person like that, can be exhausting and traumatizing. Their needs, from their perspective, will always be more important than yours, period. And they don't understand why you don't understand that. So some examples of narcissistic behaviors in relationships. One is they may use their partner to gain status, wealth, or admiration from others. Or they treat their partner like a servant or an object who only exists to serve their needs. I mean, why else are you there? They cross boundaries with little, if no remorse, and they, such as things like having extramarital affairs or spending savings without asking. They just do it because they want to do it. They need to. It's them, so it's okay. They also will lie to cover up their behavior, and that allows them to keep doing whatever it is that they were doing without any consequence. And this is a big one. They will threaten to leave the relationship, harm themselves, or harm others in order to get their way. If you don't do blah, 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 I am going to slit my wrist, or I'm going to leave, or whatever. People with narcissistic tendencies, or NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, can also behave in similar ways toward family members. It's not just romantic relationships. For example, they may demand that their relatives are obedient and they cater to their needs at all times. They kind of use emotional blackmail. They may ignore their children's feelings and push them to achieve their parents' own goals. You see this a lot with sports, such as forcing them into a particular career. Well, I went to Harvard Law and now I'm a lawyer, so you need to do the same thing. They make gaining their love a competition because they pit family members against each other, or they may choose a favorite child to make the other kids jealous. They like stirring things up. They tend to feel threatened when their children gain independence, and that may cause them to try to undermine the kids' confidence so that they can keep them close so that they don't leave home. They use guilt, shame, threats, or violence to get family members to do what they want. This is really very common. So another red flag, if the person has anger management issues, if someone close to you has an anger management problem, you may end up feeling threatened or unsafe during a conflict. The inability to control anger is a definite red flag for any relationship. All of us feel angry at one time or another. If you control it appropriately, that's fine. If you don't, that can be a problem. We should all feel comfortable enough with a partner or friend to be able to tackle those tough subjects without being afraid, are they going to hurt me? A lot of men use anger to intimidate people into doing what they want. But be aware, keep in mind, anyone, male or female, who uses anger as an intimidation tactic is displaying toxic behavior. If you ever feel scared by someone's words or actions, walk away. Get yourself into a safe place. Don't worry about how that looks or what they're going to think about you. Keeping yourself safe and your children, if you have them, should be your top priority. Another red flag is violent displays. Someone who demonstrates violence toward you, toward loved ones, strangers, or even animals, y'all, that's a serious red flag. It indicates that they haven't really developed healthy ways to channel their emotions. It also could show that they lack empathy for other people, including you. This can be things like punching holes through walls. Back when I was counseling, I had a client who tended to do that. When he would get mad, he would punch a hole through a wall. I always wondered what his house looked like. He came in to see me one time. His whole wrist was just wrapped in this big, huge, all these white bandages. And I looked at him and said, "What happened to you?" He looked really sheepish and said, "I punched a hole into a wall and I hit a stud." He broke almost every bone in his hand. And it was a long time before he did that again, if ever. I mean, that kind of taught him a lesson. Another example of violent displays: throwing things, yelling, using bad language, kicking furniture, hitting you or someone else. I've always remembered when I was in college, there was a girl I knew. I didn't know her very well. She was more like a friend of a friend. And she was dating this guy who would hit her. He hit her one time in front of her mother. She still married him. And my friend and I, who were talking about it, said, if he had done that in front of our mother, we would never have married him because she would have killed him. I mean, probably not really, but it would never have happened. So what that tells me is that probably the mom also came from a background of abuse. And I know if he was doing that when they were dating, he was doing it more once they got married. That's just how that goes. If you're dealing with any of that, get out. Another red flag is codependency in a relationship. Y'all, this is huge. Codependent people are everywhere. And at times, I think we all are a little bit. But if you live there, or if the other person lives there, it's not healthy. Codependency is said to occur when you take on the task of fixing other people's issues that they should be fixing themselves. That's it in a nutshell. And your identity can become so entwined with theirs that you can lose a sense of who you are. This is called enmeshment. You can get to the point where you really believe that your existence means nothing if the other person doesn't need you. To me, that, like I said, I don't like clinginess. I think I said that last time. This sounds like a nightmare to me. In most cases, the codependent person is a hard worker. They're dependable. They're a good caretaker. But these things can be overshadowed by this huge need that they have to be needed. The codependent person can eventually lose all sense of self. They lose touch with their own emotions, and they live entirely to make the other person happy. This is not a well-balanced life. They start feeling guilty if the other person doesn't change the way they think they should, because they feel like if they just did a little bit more, the other person would be better. And in the end, they end up doing more harm than good. Here's a key in a relationship with a codependent person. The person who is making the mistakes is not allowed to learn from their mistakes. The codependent person becomes an enabler because those bad behaviors continue to happen without consequences, because the codependent person keeps jumping in to rescue them. So, some codependent traits. One is they feel responsible for solving other people's problems. Y'all, I am so non-codependent. I really feel like it's hard enough to solve my own problems. I am not going to try to take on everybody else's. Okay, this is not happening, but that's what codependent people do. Someone who is codependent feels like they need to step in and clean up the messes that the other person gets themselves into. They will make excuses. They'll try to bail them out of jail. They feel like if they can make the other person happy, they'll stop drinking or be able to control their anger better. Whatever problem the other person has, the codependent feels it's within their power to make everything right and to change those bad behaviors. And y'all, let me just say, no, that is an illusion. Years ago, I was working through I think it was my doctorate, and I was interning at this place where I was a co-leader of a group that was meeting. And there was an older man who was a therapist. He'd been one for years. He was in charge. I was just kind of helping. But there was this, and I don't even remember what the topic of the group was, but there was this one lady I do remember. And even though I was just starting down this path of recognizing what all these things were, this woman was hugely codependent. The things she talked about with her family and her friends and coworkers and all this stuff, she was always trying to rescue everybody. So one meeting, the leader had this woman, there were like 10 to 12 people in the group. He made her go around to everybody in the group, look them in the eye, shake their hand, and say, I am so sorry. I am responsible for all the problems you're having. Sounds pretty silly. But people kind of started laughing and saying, well, where have you been? I've been looking for you. After about the fourth or fifth person, you could see that she was getting the feeling, this is kind of ridiculous, which was kind of the whole point. Now, whether that made a change in her behavior or not, I don't know, but I thought that was a pretty good way to handle it. Another codependent trait is offering advice even when it isn't asked for. Y'all, this is something that I am really, really careful with. I will very rarely offer advice unless people ask for it. And I've even been known to say, would you like some suggestions? And if they say no, I don't give them. Okay, that's it. I stop. Not codependent people. A codependent person often feels that they know what is best in any situation, and they will offer advice even when it isn't asked for. Then they will get hurt and insulted if you ignore their advice, because after all, they're just trying to help. Interestingly enough, though, I've noticed they don't always take advice well from other people. Yeah. A third codependency trait, and y'all, there are lots more. I just picked some of the 3 top ones. They have difficulty adjusting to change. This is really, really difficult for someone who is codependent. And that's because change creates a situation where things seem to be out of control, and that codependent person desperately needs to feel control. This being the case, any change can send the codependent person into the spiral of depression, stress, anxiety that has to be dealt with before they can keep moving forward. Usually they will adjust, but it can take a lot of time and effort, and they may never be completely happy about it. Okay, back to red flags. Done with codependency. The next one is the inability to resolve conflict. People who avoid conflict tend to think that they are protecting the relationship from long-term harm. Okay. But in the end, it only results in just kind of avoiding the problems and really making more of them pile up. As uncomfortable as it is, and it can be, learning to handle conflict constructively is a really important element in all healthy relationships. Without productive conflict, you're never going to resolve issues. And this can lead to a lot of resentment and wasted energy. So I may have shared this story before. I've done in a podcast now that I can't remember what I talked about in all of them. However, when I was counseling, what I kind of came to realize is when it comes to handling conflict, there are pursuers and there are avoiders. The avoiders, I mean, it's pretty obvious. They want to avoid conflict at all costs. They will literally walk out of the room. They won't talk about it. They will shut down. The pursuers want some answers and some resolution. It drives them crazy. So they keep running after the avoider, trying to pin them down, trying to get some things settled. As you can imagine, both people are hugely frustrated. So what I would recommend to them is, okay, once a week, you guys set a time, no more than like an hour. Okay, if you go an hour and 5 or 10 minutes, that's fine, but don't go 2 or 3 hours. That's too much. And during that time, you talk about issues and you come to an agreement on some things. And make a list, put it on the refrigerator, put it in your phones, wherever. And you're not going to probably be able to do everything on your list. That's fine. Just talk for the hour, get some things resolved. What this does is it allows the pursuer the knowledge that, okay, I'm not talking about it right now, but Wednesday morning, once the kids are in school, we'll talk about some things, or whatever time you set. And the avoider knows that they are not going to be stuck talking about this stuff for 10 hours. They have an hour to get through, and then they're okay until the next week. So it's not a perfect solution, but it does help get things unstuck and moving forward. And the other thing is, I've had avoiders tell me after a while, we've done this for a couple of months now. It's really not that bad. I thought it would be worse, but now that we're doing it, it's okay. That can also happen. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it can. Okay, another red flag is constant jealousy. Someone who is really jealous of you, of your connection with other people, usually there's a lot of insecurities on their part. Trust is at the heart, we've talked about this, of any healthy relationship. So if the other person routinely shows extreme jealousy, and I'm not necessarily talking about other romantic relationships, I'm talking about other friendships, about family relationships. It's a sign that they don't trust you. Aside from that, as I said, jealousy can also stem from their own insecurities. So the red flag of a very insecure partner, it can look like attentiveness in the beginning of the relationship, but there's that underlying control issue underneath all the attention. Later in the relationship, it's a lot easier to look back and see, oh yeah, they weren't just being attentive. They were jealous. They didn't want me to be with anybody else or talk to anybody else. It's easier to recognize once you're past it somewhat. Another red flag is mismatched relationship goals. All your goals do not need to be in sync, but if some major ones are at odds, it could be a sign that it's time to reconsider or walk away. Especially in a romantic relationship, y'all, you really need to pay attention. If they say, for example, that they never want to get married and you want to get married, you need to pay attention. Don't assume that is going to change. It could, but it may not. Don't think that you will be able to change them in the future. And I think I mentioned this last time, women are particularly bad about this. Other misaligned relationship goals include, where do you want to live? Do you like Alaska with all the snow and cold weather, or are you more of a beach person? It's hard to, get somewhere in between those two. Do you want to have children? What religion do you want to practice? How do you plan to tackle finances? And y'all, some things cannot be compromised on. Smoking versus non-smoking, children versus no children. You cannot have half a child. You cannot compromise between smoking or no smoking. There is no happy medium. So you need to be aware of that. Is that a deal breaker for you? And if so, walk away early in the relationship. Don't wait until you really have very strong feelings for them. Another one, I thought this one was interesting. I have heard of this before. I hadn't heard it called this, is gaslighting. Gaslighting is this really kind of sneaky form of emotional abuse where the manipulator is going to make you question your judgments and even maybe your sanity. Basically, the abuser is trying to control the other person by twisting their sense of reality. And gaslighting can occur in any relationship, platonic, family, work, romantic. It relates to narcissism. So the person might lie. They might tell you that you're forgetful. They might distort history. They might accuse you of overreacting. That's a big one. Or employ any other kind of manipulative tactic. I'll get it. To make you seem or feel mentally ill. And the goal of this is control. They want to be able to control you. So here's some common things that gaslighters will say. Well, that never happened. That's designed to make you doubt yourself and question your instincts. You're crazy. And other people think so too. They might try to convince your friends and family that you are emotionally or mentally unstable. So one time, a guy that I was involved with tried to tell me that I was doing a lot of things wrong and that my mom thought so too. Now, he knew my mom, and Barb agrees with me. And I knew my mom, and I just laughed because I knew she wouldn't say that. And that was kind of the end of things there. But that was okay. Another one they might say is, I'm sorry you think I hurt you. Y'all, this is not an apology. It sounds like it, but no, it isn't. It's a way of deflecting responsibility and blaming the victim because they're really good at that. Another thing they might say, do you really think I'd make that up? And they can sound very hurt. It's just usually when you're accusing them of lying. And usually they have lied. Yeah, and that's how they, deflect responsibility. Another thing they can say, I'm really worried about you. You keep forgetting things. This is another way to make the victim doubt themselves and make the abuser look very kind and concerned and loving, which they are not. Some more things they can say. You're not making any sense at all. You're just trying to confuse me. This is another attempt to shift blame away from them to the victim. At work, this is a common one. Well, I emailed you about whatever it was. Didn't you get it? A lot of times, this is an attempt to undermine the other person, their work performance, and make them look bad. They deliberately don't let them know about meetings or don't send them emails, and then they claim that they did. That happens a lot. Another thing they might say, I'd never purposely hurt you, trying to make you doubt yourself. You don't really feel that way. I hate this. This is dismissive. And it makes the victim question their own feelings and reactions. Another work one. You seem stressed. Maybe these new responsibilities are too much for you. This is an attempt to make the victim feel incompetent, like, well, maybe I can't handle this promotion. Yeah. A big one. I did it because I love you. This is one of the most common excuses given. They try to justify their intentions as loving and make the victim think that, well, I just had your best interest at heart. No, they did not. Another one. You're just too sensitive, or you're making too big of a deal out of this. This is an attempt to make you feel stupid for standing up for yourself. So those are some common things that gaslighters will say. Victims of gaslighters are made to feel guilty, regardless of whether or not they did anything wrong. The abuser continually chips away at their confidence and their beliefs in themselves, and they try to isolate them from other relationships. The goal is always control, and gaslighting is a clear red flag in any relationship. It can be hard to detect, so pay attention. Next red flag is lack of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, y'all, you've probably heard of this. This is the ability to perceive and to manage emotions. People with low levels of emotional intelligence, they kind of don't pick up on feelings, facial cues or expressions. They're not very empathetic. And this can result in a lot of unnecessary conflict. So some examples would be because they don't read other people very well. They're convinced that they're always right. So there's a lot of arguing with others. Insensitivity and lack of empathy. They may say the wrong or inappropriate thing routinely. They may blame others, so there's no accountability for them. They have poor social skills, so they don't have very many friends. They are self-centered. They want to be at the center of every situation. So these are, again, some things to look out for. Another red flag, they don't make an effort to get to know you, to get to know your family or your friends. And this is a big one in a romantic relationship. Now, sometimes this happens because they don't value their own family relationships and they don't have many friends, so they don't see why they should value yours. However, we need to be aware of that people who don't have many friends can in the future become clingy and dependent. And if you're the only friend that they have, or the only one they have a relationship with, guess who they're going to be clinging to? Another red flag is if the relationship moves too fast. Sometimes this looks like a positive thing. They're sweeping you off your feet in a romantic relationship. This is so fun. However, you need to be careful. They may not have bad intentions. They may just really be head over heels in love with you or trying to develop a friendship. But it could be a manipulative tactic, I'm having trouble talking, tactic like love bombing, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And also, if they really are trying to force you quickly into a relationship, a lot of times what happens is once they get you in there, the situation can turn abusive or toxic once they have you where they want you. Another red flag is being secretive. Said this before, honesty and trust are hallmarks of any healthy relationship. That said, if your partner keeps secrets from you or beats around the bush, it may be a sign that they just don't trust you enough to share what's going on. And you just need to be aware some lies are not that big of a deal, but if they routinely and frequently lie to you, you need to be careful. Also, the type of lie matters. When someone says to you, "How do I look?" If it's someone you care about, the correct response, "Oh, you look great." That's what you say. Now, if they have food between their teeth or they're unzipped, their flies unzipped, you need to let them know that. But that's a white lie. Also, by definition, all brides and all babies are beautiful. So if your friend's baby is all red-faced and scrunched up and looks like a miniature monkey, gorgeous. If the bride is wearing a dress that's completely unflattering, her hair looks, awful, she's beautiful. By definition, those are okay. That's not the kind of lie that I'm talking about. Just wanted to clarify. So another red flag is when they try to negatively affect your relationship with your family or friends. Because for most of us, family and friends, they're our security base. They provide our foundation. So if someone in your life is trying to negatively affect those relationships with the people that you love, that is not a good thing. Healthy relationships should never come at the cost of other healthy relationships. If someone feels threatened by your family and friends and tries to isolate you from them, it's a big red flag. So I mentioned love bombing a while ago. That's another red flag. And this is in romantic relationships. People with narcissistic or borderline personality disorders, among others, typically engage in love bombing. And I had not heard this term before. They manipulatively shower someone with praise and affection to gain or to regain trust quickly. They're very good at it and they're very believable. Some examples would be they give lavish gifts. They take you on expensive trips. They give you these overwhelming compliments. They say things like, "But I just want to be with you all the time." It sounds good, but what they're doing is they're demanding all your time and attention. Or they say things routinely in the beginning of the relationship, like, "Well, when we get married," because they're trying to rush you forward somewhere where you're really not ready to go. Another red flag, we just have a few more, is breadcrumbing. This is mostly in a romantic relationship, but I've seen it in a family one as well. Someone who is breadcrumbing is leading you on with these little bitty morsels of encouragement, just enough so that you don't give up on the relationship. But when you start moving toward that person, they move away. If you withdraw, they ramp up their breadcrumbing again. A breadcrumber doesn't like or intend to commit. Some examples are they flirt repeatedly, but they never ask you out. They message you to say hi and offer compliments, but they ignore your suggestions to meet. They leave comments on your social media, but they don't respond to direct messages or text. They'll say, let's go for coffee, but never follow through to set a date or a place. And they suddenly start showing a lot more interest when you start backing off. These people are trying to string you along, usually so that they won't be alone and so that they'll have this ongoing source of support and attention. Another red flag is the inability to communicate openly. Now, I will say communication doesn't come easily for everybody. Feelings of confrontation, vulnerability, or losing control a lot of times make it hard for people to speak out, okay? But if your partner is unwilling to even try to communicate on a regular basis, if you are routinely doing all or most of the talking, that is a red flag. And you need to be aware that's probably not going to get much better if the relationship continues. Last red flag, and there are more, these are just the ones that I focused on, is a lack of social connection or friends. Now, not everyone has a huge circle of friends. Some people simply find it harder to connect with other people. And it may be because they're dealing with social anxiety or they're just shy. But not having any friends or close relationships can be a red flag in someone. If you continue the relationship, you may become their only friend. And again, y'all, that can be a pretty heavy burden depending on the person. If your partner struggles to make or maintain relationships, this could indicate that you are also going to struggle to connect with them. So it's just something you need to be aware of. Okay. That's the end of the red flags. Next time, we're going to talk more about relationships, but about things that you can do to improve them. What does the Bible say about relationships? What kind of relationships did Jesus have when he was on earth? Because he's our example. Okay. For now, fun fact about Waco. This is actually more of a fun fact about Texas, but we'll take it. The Texas name, the name Texas, comes from a Caddo Indian word, Teycha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Teycha, which translates to friends or allies. This name was given by the native people who lived here before the Spanish conquest. The land of the Native American tribe, was transcribed by an early Spanish explorer as Tejas. That's a Spanish pronunciation, and eventually made its way to the name that we know today, Texas. So today, still, Texas motto is friendship. And so that embodies the Southern hospitality that the state is known for. So another fun fact about Texas, I love this, Austin, Texas' largest city, also the state capital, is known as the live music capital of the world. They have a lot of major music festivals like South by Southwest and Austin City Limits. They also have more live music venues per capita than anywhere else in the country. So you can catch a show pretty much anytime, day or night. And I think I mentioned the fact that a lot of times in Waco, people will drive to Austin or Dallas, Fort Worth, or even San Antonio or Houston for the day. Now, Houston is further, so is San Antonio. But Austin and Dallas, people do that very commonly. It's about an hour and a half. In fact, my son, David, is a home inspector here in Waco. And sometimes he will end up having to drive to Austin to do a home inspection. And he'll go do the inspections and come back in the same day. So if you're in the Waco area and you would like to hear some really good music, you may decide to check out Austin. Just a little fun fact. Okay. So along with this podcast and Waco Hypnosis Center, I am also available for public speaking. If you are interested in finding out more about that, you can contact me through my website at www.drmelissarich.com, or you can email me at info@drmelissarich.com. And ladies or gentlemen, if there are men who are listening, if you all enjoy this podcast today, I would love for you to do any or all of the following. Follow the podcast. Write me a good review. Tell everybody how amazing it is, because, hey, it really is. Or share some of the episodes. That would be very helpful. I would love it. And as always, I am glad that you all were here today. We will continue this topic next week. We will finish up relationships. I hope we'll finish up. It may go to 4 weeks, but I think it's just going to be 3. Anyway, that is it for today. Glad you all joined us. I will see you next week. Bye.